The first time my new neighbor fined me for parking on my own property, I honestly thought it was a joke. The kind of petty suburban joke people tell after 2 glasses of white wine and too much free time. Then I saw the HOA letterhead, the violation code, and the $225 fine, and I realized this woman wasn't kidding. She was trying to charge me money for using concrete I legally owned. That was the moment I learned something ugly about people. Some folks don't need actual power, they just need the confidence to pretend they have it. So let me back up a sec. The house was a corner lot. 3-bed, 2-bath. Nothing fancy, tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac in one of those neighborhoods where every mailbox looks cloned in a lab and everybody acts like mowing the lawn on Saturday is part of a blood oath. Nice enough place, quiet, clean, predictable. The thing that made my house different was the driveway. Most homes on the street had a straight shot from the garage to the curb. Mine ran along the side of the property parallel to the street, almost like a little private lane. If you drove by and didn't know better, you'd think it belonged to the neighborhood. It didn't. Every inch of that driveway sat inside my property lines. Recorded, surveyed, documented mine. But at the time, I didn't think about any of that. I just liked the setup. I could pull my truck in from the side, unload lumber or groceries without blocking anything and get on with my life. That was all I cared about. I paid my HOA dues every month, $195, kept the yard clean, brought the trash cans in on time, didn't leave busted furniture in the grass. You know, basic civilized human behavior. My philosophy with HOAs has always been simple. As long as I'm not raising goats in the front yard, leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. First real neighbor I met was Frank, retired guy, 4 houses down, lived there forever. He came over while I was still unpacking boxes in the driveway. No clipboard, no weird energy, just introduced himself like a normal person. We talked for 40 minutes. He gave me the neighborhood rundown, who was friendly, who was noisy, which kid never moved his bike off the sidewalk. Real neighbor stuff. I liked Frank right away. Then near the end he glanced across the street and said, "You met Brenda yet?" I told him no, just seen her once pulling into the garage. Frank paused like a man picking his words with tweezers. "She's very involved with the HOA. Keep your paperwork organized." I laughed, thought he was being dramatic. He wasn't. Brenda came over maybe 4 days later with a tiny succulent in a ceramic pot and a smile that looked like it had practiced in a mirror. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said. "All sweetness and good manners." I thanked her, took the plant, expected her to head home. She didn't. She stayed there scanning my driveway, my truck, the boxes by the garage, like she was conducting a soft little inspection disguised as hospitality. "So that's your main vehicle?" "Yeah. And you park it here on the side." I remember pointing at the driveway like, "Well, yeah, Brenda, that's usually what driveways are for." Her husband, Doug, stood a few feet behind her the whole time, quiet as wallpaper, gave me one of those polite nods men give when they've learned silence is the safest marital strategy. Before she left, Brenda mentioned she was on the HOA board. Then she mentioned it again. Then she laughed and said, "I basically know these rules better than the people who wrote them." That should have been my warning shot. After that, she started showing up in little ways. One morning, she walked by while I was bringing in my trash cans and called out, "FYI, those were about 6 inches past the curb line this morning." They're pretty strict. 6 inches. I didn't know whether to laugh or salute. Then there was a random HOA email about somebody's basketball hoop that somehow included me on the CC even though I didn't own one. None of it was huge by itself. That was the genius of it. It was never enough to make you sound sane if you complained. It was just this steady rhythm of presence, like she needed me to know she was watching. Then came the fine. It was a Saturday when all this really started. I'd made a Home Depot run, bought some lumber, a box of screw stain I probably didn't need, but bought anyway, because apparently I enjoy wandering those aisles like it's church. I backed my truck into my driveway so I could unload easier. Totally normal day. 4 days later, I opened my mailbox and found an HOA violation notice with an actual fine attached. Obstruction of shared access easement, section 4.2. Complaint filed by Brenda Holloway. I stood there at the mailbox, reading it 3 times because my brain refused to accept that someone had weaponized the phrase shared access easement against my own driveway. I called the management company right there. The woman on the phone was polite, professional, and useless, told me if I wanted to dispute it, I had to do it in writing. I asked where this so-called shared access easement was documented. She told me to review the governing documents. That night I went to Frank's porch and showed him the letter. His face barely changed. "She did this to the Millers," he said. Same move, different excuse. That got my attention. I went home, dug a taped-up box out of the back of my closet, and dumped my closing documents across the kitchen table. Deed title paperwork, survey plat. HOA disclosures, pages and pages of language written by people who clearly hate daylight. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy with a highlighter and too much coffee trying to find out whether his neighbor invented a road through his property. First thing I checked was the survey. There it was. Clear as day. The entire driveway sat fully inside my property lines. Not partly, not sort of, not depending on interpretation. Entirely mine. Then I pulled up the HOA bylaws online, found section 4.2, and traced it to Exhibit C, the map of designated common areas. Pool entrance, pocket parks, interior roads. My driveway wasn't on it. My lot wasn't on it. Nothing about my property was anywhere near anything labeled common area. Brenda had cited a rule that did not apply to my land. For about 15 minutes, though, I did have a little heart attack, because buried in my deed was a 5-foot easement along the back edge of my property. My stomach dropped, until I kept reading and realized it was a utility easement for underground service lines. Electric company, water department, that kind of thing. Nothing to do with road access. Nothing to do with parking. Nothing to do with Brenda and her little suburban kingdom. That was the moment my fear turned into calm. Not relief exactly, certainty. And certainty is dangerous if you're the one trying to bluff. I printed everything, survey deed language, the bylaw section, Exhibit C, the utility easement description, all of it. I highlighted the relevant lines, organized it in a folder, and wrote a dispute letter that was just facts. No drama, no accusations, no Brenda is insane, even though tempting. I mailed it certified. 3 weeks later, the HOA scheduled a hearing. The meeting was in the clubhouse, that weird multi-purpose room next to the pool that always smells like chlorine and old carpet. 5 board members sat behind folding tables pushed into a U-shape. Richard, the HOA president, was in the middle, looked like a man who'd been trying to quietly survive volunteer politics for years. Carol sat 2 seats over with a legal pad. Brenda had set herself up off to the side with her own table, her own folder, her own little courtroom fantasy. Doug sat in the back like an exhausted witness for the defense. Richard gave her the floor first. Brenda stood up and held printed photos of my truck in my driveway like she was unveiling evidence in a murder trial. Then she produced a hand-drawn map. Hand-drawn, I need to stress that, showing what she called the traditional access route, which somehow ran straight through my property. She even had 2 signed statements from neighbors saying they considered the driveway a shared road. I'll admit it, that rattled me for a second. Not because she was right, but because she'd built an entire mythology around something false and gotten people to sign on to it. Then I stood up. I laid my documents on the table, survey deed bylaws, Exhibit C, and walked them through it piece by piece. Property line here, driveway here, no overlap. Section 4.2 applies to designated common areas only. Exhibit C does not include my driveway. No recorded easement exists for HOA access. End of story. Carol leaned forward and asked the question that cracked the whole thing open. So is there an actual easement here or not? Before I could answer, Brenda jumped in. It's an implied easement. Neighbors have used that route for years. Now here's the thing. Implied easements are real legally speaking, but they don't appear because Brenda feels strongly on a Tuesday. They require actual legal establishment. I said exactly that. No court order, no deed language, no title record, no easement. Brenda got tight in the jaw and said, "Well, that's your interpretation." I almost laughed. It wasn't my interpretation. It was the county survey. Still, the board refused to decide that night. Richard did the whole bureaucratic shuffle. We need time to review documentation. We'll consult with management. All that soft language people use when they already know somebody's wrong, but don't yet know how brave they feel. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. Fine upheld pending further review. And if the obstruction continued, they might issue another fine. That was the moment it stopped being about parking. Because by then, the neighborhood vibe had changed. A guy who used to wave started pretending not to see me. A woman at the community mailbox looked at me like I'd been accused of poisoning the pool. Another neighbor, Linda, told me Brenda had been saying I was trying to cut off access to the back of the block and refusing to cooperate with the HOA. That's how these people operate when they can't win on paper. They go social. They turn repetition into truth. I came home one night, reheated cold pizza in the microwave, stood there in my kitchen, staring at 2 HOA letters on the counter, and just felt tired. Not furious, not revenge movie angry. tired. I bought that house to have something quiet and mine. Instead, I was living inside somebody else's delusion. That's when the twist showed up. Frank knocked on my door 2 nights later carrying a manila folder with a rubber band around it. Inside were photos, notes, dates. The Millers. The couple who owned my house before me. Same driveway, same argument, same bylaw section, same Brenda. She'd find them too. They paid once, then paid again. Frank believed it was part of why they sold and left. He looked me dead in the eye and said I should have done something then. I'm not making that mistake twice. That changed everything. A friend at work gave me the number of a real estate attorney, Mr. Patterson. I brought him the whole stack. My documents, HOA letters, hearing notes, Frank's Miller folder. He read everything, took off his glasses, and said, "This is straightforward." Honestly, that annoyed me for half a second because to me it had become my whole life. To him it was simple. Then I realized that was the gift. On his desk, the thing that had been poisoning my evenings shrank back down to its actual size, a baseless property claim dressed up like authority. Patterson sent a letter to the HOA, Richard Management, the whole board. It was polite in the same way a scalpel is polite. Survey confirms private property. Exhibit C confirms the driveway is not common area. Section 4.2 was misapplied. Reverse the fine within 21 days or we proceed. He also included Brenda's quote from the hearing that road belongs to the HOA. It always has. Then he noted that a sitting board member had advocated enforcement based on personal belief, rather than recorded legal documentation. That line hit like a brick. Monday morning, Richard called me sounding like a man whose stomach had been doing backflips all weekend. He didn't come in strong. He came in soft, feeling around for whether I'd settled quietly. I told him the letter spoke for itself. 2 days later, Carol texted me, said not everyone on the board agreed with how this had been handled. A week after that, somebody forwarded me an internal email thread. Brenda was still digging in, talking about community standards and neighborhood tradition, and property technicalities like legal boundaries were some minor inconvenience. Tom, one of the board guys, replied with one sentence that might as well have been a hammer. "I think we need to follow whatever the survey says." Then Frank sent in his Miller evidence. Pattern established. Now, it wasn't just my dispute, it was repeated conduct. That Friday, Richard called again. Different tone. Flat resigned, done. The board has voted to reverse the fine. 4-1. Complaint dismissed. I just stood there in my kitchen holding the phone, letting the quiet settle. He added that they were updating the bylaw language to clarify the distinction between common areas and private driveways within recorded lot boundaries. Then after a pause, he said, "I'm sorry this got as far as it did." That was the closest thing to justice people like Richard know how to say. I never got some big dramatic showdown with Brenda. No last speech, no public collapse, no Hollywood moment. What she got was better. She got a letter in her mailbox, same as the one she helped send me, telling her the fine was reversed, the complaint was dead, and the rule was being rewritten because she was wrong. Frank saw her reading it at the curb, just standing there in the same place I had stood, then walking back inside without a word. And honestly, that was perfect. Because she wanted a stage. She wanted a room. She wanted to keep performing certainty until people confused it for truth. Instead, she got paper. Quiet, official, undeniable paper. A month later, the HOA sent out the updated standards. Section 4.2 now specifically clarified that private driveways inside recorded property boundaries are not common areas and cannot be treated as shared access routes. My name wasn't in it, didn't need to be. That paragraph was my victory lap. And here's the part that stuck with me after everything cooled down. I don't actually think Brenda was lying. I think she believed her own story so completely that she never checked whether it was true. That's worse in a way. A liar knows what they're doing. Somebody who mistakes certainty for truth will hurt people and sleep fine at night. She pushed one family out, tried to do it again, recruited neighbors, stained reputations, waved around a hand-drawn map, all because she trusted her assumptions more than actual records. That's the lesson I took from it. The world is full of people who confuse familiarity with ownership, opinion with authority, confidence with fact. And if you don't know your own rights, those people can make you feel like a trespasser on your own land. These days, I park my truck in my driveway, the exact same spot that started all of this. I drink my coffee in the morning, wave at Frank Moe on Saturdays, normal life, normal street. But I keep my paperwork close now, because sometimes peace isn't something you get by being agreeable. Sometimes peace is something you protect with a survey, a folder, and the refusal to be bullied by somebody in sensible shoes holding fake authority like it's a crown. So let me ask you this. If somebody in your neighborhood kept abusing the rules to control property that wasn't theirs, would you fight it all the way through? Or would you pay the fine just to keep your life quiet? And where do you think the line is between community standards and plain old power tripping? Drop your take in the comments. Who was right, who was wrong, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a nosy neighbor, or somebody who acted like your property belonged to them, tell your story too. I've got a feeling I'm not the only one.